Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolutions Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on July 5th, 2024 from karmicevolution.com or any of your favorite podcast stations. So before we get into this week's astro news you can use, my usual quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution, and that a new podcast drops every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern on karmicevolution.com or most major podcast platforms. So in addition to just reminding you now that I'm offering my 75-minute Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for a discounted $125, and that discount is for podcast listeners only, I'm telling you that if you want more information about it, you can easily go to karmicevolution.com/karmic125. I am eliminating my little advertisement in the hopes that I have enough time to get through this podcast and say all that I want to say, and you'll find out what that is in just a minute. So I will dispense with the usual. The only thing I do want to tell people about by way of marketing/advertising is that my friend astrologer Ronnie Dreyer has scheduled a webinar titled The Next 6 Months, What's New for July through December of 2024 to take place on Sunday, July 21st, 2024 at 11 a.m. And if you cannot attend live, you will definitely get the recording by the next day. So the registration closes at midnight on July 20th. It's only July 5th today, so that's plenty of time. And if you do register after that deadline, you will definitely get the recording. So for more information on the price, etc., or to register, simply go to ronnidreyer.com/schedule. And that is Ronnie, RONNIE, last name Dreyer, DREYER.com/schedule. All right, so let's get into this week's astro news you can use, because as I said, there's a lot here. So I recorded last week's podcast before the actual June 27th U.S. presidential debate between current President Joe Biden and presumptive GOP nominee and former President Donald Trump. And since then, Biden's shockingly disappointing performance at that debate is currently, a little over a week later, still causing a great deal of panic amongst Democrats. So let's review just a bit as I remind you that the debate occurred 2 days before Saturn's station retrograde at 19 degrees and 25 minutes of Pisces on June 29th. And since then, Neptune has also stationed retrograde, but that took place on July 2nd at 29 degrees 55 minutes of Pisces, almost the end of that sign. So given that Saturn's currently transiting through Pisces, and that Pisces is, at least according to modern astrology, Neptune ruled, I believe this adds a profound degree of relevance to the fact that these two retrograde planet periods overlap. at least until Saturn stations direct again at 12 degrees and 41 minutes on November 15th. Neptune, of course, the slower moving planet, has a longer retrograde period, and so he won't station direct again until he reaches 23 degrees and 15 minutes of Pisces on January 30th of 2025. Now, given that both of these planets will appear to be moving backward between now and at least November 5th, 2024, which is the date of the U.S. presidential election, the breaking down or blurring of previously strong foundational borders continues as we review what's happened thus far and how we want to proceed in the future. And yes, on July 1st, the day before Neptune's station retrograde, the U.S. Supreme Court appeared to blur the boundaries between exactly what constitutes presidential immunity based on parsing the difference between quote-unquote official acts versus unofficial ones. And further complicating the issue, or should I say muddying the waters, the Supreme Court remanded this case back to the lower court, asking it to decide what does define official and what does define unofficial when it comes to actions taken by a sitting president. Now, I'm not going to go into all the legal details, as clearly you can Google the gaggle of articles and podcasts and videos all about this decision and people's reaction to it, especially, of course, Supreme Court scholars, law school professors, and others. But what I will say is that astrologically, at least, it's no surprise that the whole legal issue has now been put on hold based on the retrograde motion of Saturn, so that the lower court judge, Tanya Chutkan, can clarify any confusion, while Neptune retrograde has us revisiting the definitions of official and unofficial actions. So to say that leaves us in limbo for now would be, I think, completely accurate, and again, completely in alignment with these two planetary retrogrades energies right now. As you know, most of the pundits are saying that there's very little chance that there will be a trial. Jack Smith's trial, of course, on the federal criminal charges against Trump for not inciting the January 6th riot, but for tampering with the electoral process, right? And that the judge may well be able to engage before the election in discovery, which means that a lot of details will come out into the public domain, but not because there's going to be a trial at the end of which there will be a conclusion either by a jury or a judge. So, there's some ray of hope here that even though slowed down, that the discovery period, technically much slower than an actual trial might be, is still going to release or reveal, let's just say, some important details that may be useful if and when Donald Trump ever does go to trial under those charges. Now, combined with President Biden's disastrous debate performance, as these two planets, Saturn and retrograde, were slowing down to station, his physical stamina and intellectual ability, apparently through his seeming confusion and mental frailty during this debate, seemed to completely dissolve. And dissolution is a particular archetypal trait of Neptune-ruled Pisces, especially since the planet in that sign was slowing down to station retrograde. So let's remember now that these events just mentioned, both astrological and newsworthy, occurred during the last quarter waning square phase of this past month's lunar cycle, which began with the conjunction of the Gemini Sun, Moon, and Venus on June 6th. Now, at that time, wounded healer Chiron was also conjoined with Hygeia, the goddess asteroid of health, in the sign of Aries. Though I'm sure I related that previously or in previous podcasts to events in Gaza and the looming health crisis there, I'm now seeing it also as highlighting, as part of this lunation's monthly theme, of wounded health and stamina, and Mars ruled Aries is often one who takes independent action, such as a leader, right? And so this may well be highlighting the woundedness of the appearance of President Biden's health and stamina at the waning portion of this past monthly lunar cycle. And as I noted also last week, this cycle culminated with the Capricorn full moon squaring Neptune on June 21st, which since then seems to have thrown a good portion of us into a great deal of confusion over who should continue to lead this country or not. The retrogrades of both Saturn and Neptune this past week during the third quarter waning square until today's July 5th Cancer New Moon have merely continued our confusion, as noted. So before I get into delineating the energy of today's new lunar monthly cycle, which begins with the Cancer New Moon at 3:57 p.m. and 6:57 p.m., 3:57 p.m. Pacific time and 6:57 p.m. Eastern time at 14 degrees and 23 minutes of Cancer, let's remember that this lunar monthly cycle beginning today is still right now actually exiting from the previous, as I said, Gemini New Moon and Capricorn full moon cycle that asked us to discuss releasing old values based on what others have told us to believe, and in doing so to make space for truer values that resonate more deeply given our current times and circumstances. Let me add, too, that yesterday on July 4th, the 248th birthday of the United States of America, if we acknowledge that that occurred on July 4th, 1776 at 5:10 p.m. in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is the U.S. Sibley chart that I use as this nation's birth or birth chart, that the sun in that chart is at 13 degrees and 30, hang on a second, I just had it, 13 degrees and 19 minutes. So the sun in the sky yesterday, as we were approaching the balsamic end of the Gemini New Moon cycle begun June 6th, before we enter the Cancer New Moon, that we had America's birthday, and that the sun in the sky conjoined with the America's Sibley natal birth chart. All right, so we'll get more into that in a minute. But anyway, what I was saying about the upcoming, what I was saying about the past cycle that's ending now is that the Gemini New Moon asked us to plant seeds that reminded us of our basic elementary knowledge. That's a very strong basic archetypal interpretation of Gemini, right? We are in the early childhood learning, they call it. That 1 + 1 = 2, and that learning our ABCs has to come first before we can either read or express ourselves through writing. And we value that, right? Because without it, how can we pass information? Or correct information anyway, or factual information. But wait, said the Capricorn moon as it opposed the Cancer sun on June 21st. How did you get from there to here? Are you perhaps looking at situations from an emotional point of view and basing your current values on that, rather than, say, releasing ones that no longer hold true for you in order to create a firmer foundation for more relevant values to our time and situations to take hold? And given that both luminaries, along with Mercury and Venus in Cancer, were square to Neptune at that Capricorn full moon lunation, might you have incorrectly connected your emotions to an unsupportable, or worse yet, apocryphal solution? In other words, were you blinded by smoke and mirrors and tempted to believe that just because someone said something that made you feel more secure, that it was also factually true? And so we were asked to release, because we'd already planted seeds related to our making space for our true basic elementary value system, those values which might have been based on lies, either because someone deceived us into believing them or we deceived ourselves. Either way, it doesn't really matter. So there is a lot inherent in that decision, which many of you have doubtless already learned through media reports and stated law professors' opinions, as I said before, among others. So I'd rather dwell here not on the microcosm, but on the big picture, the Jupiterian one, if you will, that looks at the higher meaning of such a historical moment for the United States of America. As we approach as we approach the July 4th, 248th birthday of the United States, based on the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and are 2 years out from the first Pluto return, meaning 2 years past the first Pluto return, which occurred at 27 degrees and 33 minutes of Capricorn on February 30th of 2022, we can see, February 30th, duh, oh my God, I'm tripping over myself. I do this often. If you listen to this podcast relatively often, you notice. But I'm always so anxious to get everything in. The first Pluto return at 2733 Capricorn occurred on February 20th of 2022. And we can see that we are, or since then, have been experiencing what New York-based astrologer Michael Luton calls a recurrence of the energy of the day of that birth. Further, Pluto, due to its retrograde between Capricorn and Aquarius through much of 2023, and again coming up between September and November of 2024, reconjoined its natal position on July 11th of 2022 and December 29th of 2022. It also came close to within 1 degree of the natal U.S. Pluto when Pluto stationed direct at 27 degrees and 53 minutes of Capricorn on October 11th of 2023. Lest you think that's the end of the matter, think again. And that's because Pluto's rotation back to its natal position is a 240-year cycle, and therefore this period marked the beginning of a new cycle in American history. And recurrence happens whenever an aspect in the sky repeats itself in the chart, including by conjunction. In other words, Pluto's completion of a complete cycle back to its natal position marks a time when we hark back to the energies of birth at that point in time. So, since at least July 11th of 2022, the date on which transiting Pluto first conjoined its natal position in the U.S. Sibley chart, we can acknowledge, we, meaning those who've not acknowledged this previously, that we are in a recurrence of the energies from July 4th, 1776. So, what were those energies? Well, America was not yet officially an independent sovereign nation, since it was under the power and control, which colonists called tyranny, of Great Britain's King George III. As such, colonists had to adhere to British law, British taxes, trade tariffs, British appointed officials such as local magistrates, etc., and others, and generally simply were not free to rule themselves in many ways. So I want to read you now portions of an article published in the December 2006 issue of Vanity Fair magazine by Michael Luton, its resident astrologer of 25 years back then, entitled Special Alert, Horoscope USA. At that time, Pluto was at the end of Sagittarius, approaching its transition into Capricorn. All right, so buckle up, everyone, because even if you've read this in the past, rereading it now can seem quite uncannily shocking in its correlation to current events. So bear with me, and happy birthday to all of us who are American. And let's see that we might not be able to glean some measure of hope from what Michael Luton has to say. Okay, and here I quote, America was born on July 4th, 1776, when the Founding Fathers decided it was time to separate from England and start a new life as an independent entity. That makes America a Cancer nation. Cancer is the sign of fertility, and America sees herself as the world's nurturing mother. But because of the hostile presence of Mars and Uranus in our solar 12th house, now Michael did a lot of solar charts, which is how you cast the monthly horoscopes for a group of people. That's solar chart is where you put the sun on the ascendant. So that's what he's talking about. You're looking at it from the ascendant. But anyway, that's what most of the magazines and monthly and daily horoscopes are based on. Anyway, he says, because of the hostile presence of Mars and Uranus in our solar 12th house, which is the house of hidden enemies, we're the kind of nurturer that can bomb the hell out of a country one day and send over sandwiches and coffee the next. That makes the rest of the world love us and hate us. We're like the rich relative everybody is jealous of, but still visits for the holidays because there's always plenty of food. It is the sincere and conscious wish of every Cancer, including the USA, to make sure that all those under its wing are safe. And if you mess with them, you must be ready to face the special forces. Security and home are primal drives of this sign, sometimes to the point of clannishness or even xenophobia. America is and always has been about property, taxes, and land ownership. Conveniently, we forget that when the early settlers arrived, they took one look around and said to the Indians, or the Native Americans, "What a gorgeous place you've got here! Get out!" Territory is everything, and if anyone tells you that the essence of the American dream is just about liberty and freedom, don't kid yourself. It's about mortgage rates. But are we, in the end, ruthless imperialists doomed to be brought down by our degenerate culture? That is the question Pluto's transit through the sign of Capricorn over the next 19 years will answer. Remember, he's writing this in December 2006. It will challenge us as we have never been challenged before, until it will seem that the whole world is against us. But it will also reveal the secret of how we need to change. The sign of Capricorn has always been strong in our Cancer nation's horoscope, and it's going to get a lot stronger. We were born with Pluto in Capricorn, and now, more than 2 centuries later, Pluto is coming back to the same place. The seeds that were sown back in the 1770s are sprouting at last. That's how Pluto works, over hundreds of years. Though Pluto has recently been demoted by astrologers to a not quite planet, and I interject here, this occurred when Pluto was reclassified as a dwarf planet by the International Astronomical Union in 2006, and Michael Luton goes on to say, the power of the little dwarf is so profound and catastrophic that it doesn't matter if you call it a planet or not. It's a killer. But oddly, it's also a healer. When Pluto moves into your sign, it threatens to devastate you emotionally and physically, letting you know along the way that you must stop whatever you are doing. However you were conducting business or your personal life, that's over. Finito. Kaput. When you come out of a Pluto transit, you are changed forever, in another state. But during the process, you don't realize what's happening. Life can get pretty dark. With Pluto, you can't look ahead. You can't be impatient. Most of all, you shouldn't be afraid because in the end, there is nothing to fear. You just have to surrender to the mysterious process of complete and total transformation. This is about to happen to the United States as we deal with an opposition of Pluto in the sign of Capricorn to our Cancer sun. And here I interject again that this occurred in both 2014 and 2015. And Michael Luton goes on to say, and while Cancers and Capricorns will be most strongly affected by this planetary motion, we will all be touched in business as well as in our personal lives, no matter what sign we were born under. Because of Pluto's slow motion through the heavens, it takes nearly 250 years to go through the 12 signs of the zodiac, it rules over mass movements and great political and social changes. So it might be useful to look at what happened the last time Pluto passed over the position it holds now and will hold for the next 20 years. Sometime in the 1760s, pamphlets began to circulate in the colonies, exploring new ideologies and belief systems concerning individual liberty and personal freedom. Harmless enough. Just philosophers spouting rehashed versions of ancient Greek and Roman notions. but the crown over in England looked upon such doings as seditious. Mother England, once the great protector, was beginning to be the great drag. She wanted payback for all the protection she'd provided. That was when the colonists, starting to exhibit the collective traits of a Cancer nation, came to resent their mother's hold on them. She was getting a little too bossy and greedy. Clearly, something was happening up in the heavens. Pluto was just about to leave the sign of Sagittarius and enter the sign of Capricorn. A transformation was taking place, and so the United States of America was born. Something similar is happening again, 230 years later, as Pluto is coming around to the same spot. This time, however, it's the American government that is putting the squeeze on the people. A Pluto-style transformation doesn't happen overnight, and events that seem at first random and explosive don't come out of nowhere. They have been brewing and simmering for years. While many people will probably be nervous wrecks during the 2 turbulent decades ahead, many old hippies will come joyfully out of retirement, thankful that the revolution they quit their jobs for 40 years ago may finally be happening. And their kids, born in the 60s and 70s, who grew up embarrassed by their hippie parents, may be shocked to see how right their parents were. When Pluto goes direct in September of this year, and here he's referring to September 8th, 2008, when Pluto transited at 28 degrees and 29 minutes of Sagittarius, and he says, the religious zeal or madness that has taken hold since it entered Sagittarius in 1994 will reach a crescendo, ushering in a period dominated by the sign of Capricorn. Our dialogue with radical Islam has only just begun. Over the next 19 years or so, America as a Cancer nation will have to deal with troubling confrontations and competition such as it has never known, as well as an internal political struggle, all of which will shake us to our very core. Capricorn can be pictured as the mustache-twirling landlord in a black cloak pointing outside toward the blizzard while a poor pregnant wretch begs for mercy. Capricorn forces one to grow up, face life, recognize that it's a tough world. It lends you a dime and asks for $1 in return. It can be the sign of an inspired leader or a controlling, dominating fascist. It can support your existence or threaten it completely. Either way, the presence of Capricorn always indicates big business. And what is America about if not that? Capricorn represents supremacy and power. And if Capricorn is not the most humanitarian sign in the zodiac, it always means stability. Capricorn supports organized society, not rabble-rousing anarchy. It is often perceived as uptight and reactionary, mainly because its function is to uphold existing law. It is not progressive or forward-thinking. It clearly represents the deep streak of conservatism that has always existed in the United States, but that seems to be ascendant at the moment. If Capricorn protects the status quo, how did it help sow the seeds of revolution in the original colonies? There's the problem. And the answer? It was not just the presence of Capricorn in America's horoscope, it was the presence of Pluto in that sign that sparked the fight for freedom. If you think that things are tough now and that privacy and other personal liberties are being infringed upon, just wait. During the next 19 years, things are going to get much tighter. Controls and laws will become more stringent. Pluto in Capricorn will demand conformity, born out of fear that different is dangerous. The more resistance to government protection, the more protection the government will try to provide. The words patriot and treason will lose their meaning, and in some cases they will become interchangeable. What is treason to one person will be patriotism to another, just as it was back in the 1760s and 70s. Now I'm asking you, and I'm interjecting this, How can you not relate that to January 6th? Incredible, right? Okay, so Michael Luton goes on, the country's mood will become darker and much more conservative. It's not going to be a matter of Democrat or Republican anymore because the new ideologies will bleed across party lines. Fortunately, something else will be going on at the same time. While Pluto is in Capricorn, Uranus will be leaving the sign of Pisces and reaching the end of the zodiac sometime between 2009 and 2011. The dam is going to break. The last time this happened was at the end of the 1920s. When Uranus comes to the last degree of Pisces, it will spell the end of an era. People will figure, the hell with it, the end is coming anyway. Give me another double martini. As we get closer to that time, people will put all their chips on the table. The stakes will be higher. Incidentally, America began the war in Iraq when the sun was at the end of Pisces, a perfectly moronic time to start anything. Metaphorically, culturally, and sometimes even literally, Uranus at the end of Pisces can seem like a torrential flood that comes out of nowhere. Everything that has piled up and been swept under the rug comes spilling out. Now, if memory serves, I know in 2013 here in New York, New Jersey, we had Hurricane Sandy. I was trying to remember what years the Katrina was, but I think that was earlier, before 2007. But anyway, it's interesting, right? Everything that's piled up and been swept under the rug comes spilling out. To the apocalypse crowd, it will seem like the wrath of God because lots of people are going to be headed towards self-indulgent, turning up the music and dancing, even hurrying the end, much as they did in America during the 1920s. And that makes me think of the rapture, right? Anyway, Luton continues, when Uranus hits the 29th degree of Pisces, before it pops into Aries, even the Pope could have a stroke over the upheaval the world will find itself in. Uranus in Pisces washes everything away, every hope, every prayer, and the only thing that saves you is the ability to surrender to the inevitable shift. Once Uranus hits Aries, however, a whole segment of the population is going to rise up. When the government becomes business and business becomes government, the people will fight back, and the ensuing struggle will lead to the eventual transformation and rebirth of America. Now again, I just want to mention here that it might pay to remember Michael Luton's words here, as now we've got Neptune, not Uranus, but Neptune in the last degree of Pisces, as it's stationed at 29 and is going to go back and then come back again. And it's Neptune that's also a collective outer planet that represents a whole host of things, including by virtue of its rulership of the natural 12th house in everyone's chart, including birth, right? So Aries is the natural, the cardinal point that starts the natural chart's ascendant. So keep this in mind as we approach Neptune's first entrance into Aries, which won't happen until March 31st of 2025, as well as when Saturn catches up to him by entering the same sign of Aries on May 25th, 2025. The two planets won't actually come close to conjoining until they are near exact in Aries in July 2025, but they perfect their conjunction at 0 Aries on February 20th, 2026. So keep that in mind, because they're at their anaretic, going to be at their anaretic degrees close to that time, which is the first or the last degree of the sign. 29 Pisces is an anaretic degree, and that's the one that Michael Luton refers to when he's talking about the transit of Uranus from several years back. Now I'll go back to his article. Pluto in Capricorn is going to change America from the inside out, threaten our very existence, challenge our economy, and divide the country politically. Don't forget that Pluto entered Capricorn in November of 2008, and we had the fall of the housing market, right? And Michael goes on to say, the government is going to be so paranoid during those years that it doesn't really matter who gets in 2008. He's talking about that election. Pluto in Capricorn means the ascendance into overt power of corporations in relation to the government. Citizens United, anyone? But that situation, Luton says, will change when Pluto enters Aquarius at the end of the 2020s. Uranus in Aries is going to be the 1960s all over again. The greatest time of upheaval will be between 2015 and 2019, when the square of Uranus in Aries to Pluto in Capricorn will create the seeds of revolution everywhere. Forces of repression are going to clamp down even harder for those on those who want to speak their minds. It's a little bit later, but Black Lives might matter, anyone, right? Then in the years 2023 to 2025, the final stages of the Pluto return, the Capricorn effect will reach a climax. Some astrologers believe that an empire lasts no longer than one Pluto cycle, and by 2025 this cycle will be played out. And no matter how you look at it, the USA is an empire. Just as the British Empire began enduring sunsets after the fledgling colonies won their independence, our turn may be coming. The Pluto return of 2025 will demand a redefinition of the United States and create the ultimate identity crisis. We will have to put ourselves on the line, as we did in the 1770s. The period of turbulence that lies before us all in America is not God's wrath or the work of radical Muslims, and it has nothing to do with the hole in the ozone layer. It is a necessary and inevitable step in the evolution of this country, which will result in a reworking of the Constitution in the last half of the 2020s. This political, social, cultural, and economic change will mark the rebirth of the United States as a more global nation, a member of the world, if not the leader of the world. This is a threatening challenge to the notions of land ownership, security, wealth, and supremacy our Cancer nation has enjoyed for more than 2 centuries. The dollar will likely not go back to its post-World War II strength. I don't know if that's true or not, and he says other countries will reject our exploitation and demand instead our cooperation. Well, I would interject, I know in terms of the dollar, there have been challenges to, the American dollar representing, the strongest in the world. But regardless, Luton concludes, luckily for us, the horoscope of the USA is strongly influenced by Venus and Jupiter, so we'll never go totally broke or hungry. We will, however, have to play ball with the rest of planet Earth as we never have before. From now on, it's cooperate or else. No one is really to blame. We've brought ourselves to this crisis through a combination of individual freedom and economic gain, as well as a blind, isolating grandiosity. America is a fabulous place to live. You can come here, think up something you want to do, and be successful at it. But we've gotten fat and we've gotten lazy. So don't blame George Bush or Bill Clinton or any of the elected officials in Washington. A country gets the leaders it deserves. And when we're ready to rise from the ashes of a fallen empire, we will find the leaders to help us do so. It will happen, but not in 2008. We have to go through the Pluto transit first. End quote. Phew, right? I mean, you may need to listen to that again before it all really sinks in. But Mr. Michael Luton must have the word prescient stamped on him somewhere. So, having said all of that, or read all of that, let's move forward, keeping in mind its context about America's Pluto return period and its aftermath, as we look at the microcosm of today's Cancer New Moon's energies. So occurring at 3:57, I said this before, but I'll repeat it, 3:57 p.m. and 6:57 p.m. today on July 5th at 14 degrees and 23 minutes in the sign of the nurturing mother. This Cancer New Moon calls us to plant seeds of greater emotional self-compassion that can enable us to be more sensitively and intuitively attuned to others. Keep in mind what Michael Luton just said, or what I just read to you, right? We're a nation who can bomb the hell out of another country and then, deliver tea and sympathy the next day, right? However, our challenge at this particular lunation lies with the cardinal cross formed by both luminaries, which have conjoined in Cancer, to their almost exact opposition to Ceres in Capricorn, as all of those planets, or dwarf planets, square the transiting Libra Aries nodal axis, which lies close to the midheaven and the IC, or fourth house cusp axis, but actually has the Libra South Node having retrograded back into the ninth house and the Aries South Node in the fifth house. So this grand square implies an awful lot of tension between mom and dad, who want to nurture but are impeded by the dwarf planet Ceres, goddess of the grain, who in Capricorns is restricting such nurturing. Now, I've spoken in the past about Ceres' mythological meaning as the Greek Demeter, the mother of Persephone, who grieves when she is kidnapped, her daughter is kidnapped, and she is, when Persephone is kidnapped and raped by Hades, Pluto, and taken underground to remain there as his queen. In mourning, Ceres Demeter stops the crops from growing. So here we have the Cancer Sun and Moon, which aren't actually that far from Venus, although Venus has moved ahead in Cancer, to say we value basically compassion and sensitivity and nurturing comes in the form of feeding, right? I've mentioned this many times before. If your tummy's full, it's a lot easier to have your faith nurtured than if you're not, right? So I'm saying that this lack of nurturing would be especially true, or this impediment to nurturing ourselves and others at this new moon, when we're asked to plant seeds of a greater self-compassion so that we can ultimately have greater compassion for others. That this is especially true, that this sentiment or impetus is stymied because Ceres is in the sign of earthy Capricorn, which represents rigidity and boundaries, and is in oppositional aspect to Cancer's sensitivity towards nurturing, as I said, especially through sustenance in the form of literal food. So depriving families, particularly those with children, of such sustenance can have devastating effects, as we've seen the world over, from Gaza to Darfur to Sudan to Haiti to many other places that are current global hotspots affected by either war or the direct impact of climate change. And this is further compounded by the fact that Juno in Virgo, the goddess asteroid of partnership, will come within 3 minutes of an exact opposition to Saturn in Pisces shortly after the Cancer new moon on July 6th. I mentioned last week, in connection with Saturn's station retrograde on June 29th, the disruption of maritime traffic through the Suez Canal, meaning a potential slowdown in the delivery of goods over water. And Venus in Cancer also squares wounded healer Chiron in Aries on July 5th, which means it's squaring Hygeia as well, or it's going to square Chiron either the 5th or the 6th, depending on your time zone. And that highlights the painful wounds related to partnerships and families and children, the latter, because Venus is in Cancer, the latter of those clearly the least able to speak out for themselves. Now there is hope, however, in this lunation's energies, by virtue of the fact that both luminaries are trine to Saturn and sextile to Juno, meaning perhaps they're in treaties to find a way to ease this traffic jam, both the literal one or any other kind of traffic jam any of us might be experiencing now, may bear fruit. And ditto for Mars and Taurus's sextile to Saturn and its trine to Juno, as this may speed up negotiations between partners who are currently at loggerheads. I'm not quite sure at this point, because so much attention has been focused domestically this past week, what the heck is going on with a peace treaty or a stoppage of the war in Gaza currently between Israel and Hamas. So there may be more to talk about next week, but right now that also seems to be in a Neptunian, Piscean fashion, kind of unclear about who's saying what. There was an article this past week, I think, that had one of Netanyahu's cabinet members saying that they were going to stop fighting in Gaza, and Netanyahu disputing that. and saying that wasn't an official statement. So I don't know. Anyway, Mercury in Leo's sextile to Jupiter in Taurus, which perfects on July 8th, as does Venus in Cancer's sextile to Uranus in Taurus that day, may combine to expedite a change in values about heeding important messages of impending famine through grand speeches that garner the attention of the powers that be. When the Cancer Sun trines Saturn in Pisces exact on July 10th, we'll find ourselves at the portion of Saturn's retrograde period that may well help us break through some of the impasses that we have been experiencing until then. Now, Venus trines Neptune on July 11th and then promptly enters Leo, joining Mercury there. Venus then repeats Mercury's pattern from July 3rd, when Mercury opposed Pluto, and Venus will oppose Pluto in Aquarius. So this may bring up venal subjects, such as power struggles over sex and money and who controls what within the sphere of relationships. When we bring into this a more Jupiterian kind of context, right, we get these legal decision by the Supreme Court about presidential immunity and how now there's going to be a struggle between the courts, or the lower court ruled, the one that Judge Chutkan is in charge of, over some of these issues about what can be used in a potential trial or future trial of Donald Trump in the context of, withholding a story about his sexual liaison with Stephanie Clifford, the porn star, and also certain things related to money and I would guess, legislative stuff, There is also, I'm not going to have time to go into it, but there's so much about people rethinking President Biden's candidacy now for re-election, right? And that I think what I've read and what I've heard is that there's about $300 million, give or take a few, in the coffers, the campaign coffers raised by Joe Biden for his re-election campaign, and that should he be persuaded to drop out of the race, and this is a whole nother topic, because if you remember last week I said that Saturn stationed on his IC, which is the cusp of his 4th house, and quincunx, the cusp of his 11th house. And 11th house is groups and associations, and also represents in mundane astrology the legislature, and that there would be some kind of adjustment about how groups of people might view him. Well, I was thinking positively at the time because I was speaking the hours before the debate actually occurred, and it turned out to be the opposite, right? That people, since that date, became started to rethink his ability to continue as president. So let me just continue with what's going on next week. Venus trines Neptune on July 11th, and then promptly, I said this already, sorry about that. So I think, there's struggles, given that the Venus opposite Pluto on July, Venus trine Pluto is going to lead to Venus opposite Pluto, actually, but that's not going to happen until July 12th, right? So Venus trines Neptune on the 11th, then she enters Leo a very short time later, and by Friday, she's going to oppose Pluto. And on the 13th, which we'll talk about next week, we'll have the first quarter waxing lunar square of the Libra moon to the Cancer sun. So, the big thing I think about this particular lunation happening today is the pitting of Juno against Saturn and the fact that partners are in disagreement. We see this written all over right now in domestic politics, right? So, based on that horrible, very bad, horrible, no good debate that Biden had, we may well see people turning against him, right? Um, Okay, I'm not sure if I recorded this or not because I think I was off while I was still talking. So what I want to say is that I discussed last week how transiting Saturn in Biden's chart also would retrine after its station retrograde his 12th house natal Mars in Scorpio, meaning that he'd potentially have what it takes in the long run to combat hidden enemies, some of whom may have taken on that label since this recent debate. However, whether they will really group together to rally against him or not remains to be seen. But we are seeing the beginnings of that. I was listening to Keith Olbermann's Countdown podcast, and he quoted Will Bunch from a writer for the Philadelphia Inquirer, who since Tuesday, July 2nd, said it does feel like an energy shift in the force since that debate. So we are on kind of rocky ground here, right? I think we have to use our intuition because we're now coming into the Cancer New Moon energies, and if there's anything that Cancer excels at, it's the intuitive process. So using that to to decide, and I kind as Keith Olbermann has said, he hates to say this, and so do I, is President Biden too old? And is it just hubris that is preventing him from even contemplating leaving the presidential election? What I started to say before, that I'm sorry I interrupted myself and didn't finish, is the Venus opposite Pluto, I feel might be resonating with the news that's coming out. Not that this is, anything super shocking, but that Biden is the only one who can decide not to run again. And he is the only one who could, because of the funds that were raised for his campaign, which I mentioned were somewhere in the realm of $300 million thus far, that the only way that money could go to another Democratic candidate would be if it was Kamala Harris, because she is already, I guess, theoretically part of his campaign. So that money, I don't know what else could or would happen to it, but it could not be transferred to another Democratic nominee. So there's a lot of food for thought here, and a lot of things going on. I would mention also that transiting Jupiter is currently on Biden's 7th house Saturn at 9 degrees and 57 minutes of Gemini, and that his natal Saturn is retrograde. So it's kind of interesting, right? Saturn, 1 foot on the brake, Jupiter, 1 foot on the gas. So undoubtedly that is I would imagine, how Joe Biden is feeling right now. Meanwhile, I pointed out last week that transiting Saturn is in Donald Trump's 7th, having already squared his natal Uranus, and it will retrograde back before it stations, and it's within a degree basically of squaring his nodal axis from the 4th house to the 10th, from Sagittarius to Gemini. But what I didn't realize last week is that Jupiter is in his 10th house, and that it is heading by the, I think it's in late October, to conjoin with his natal North Node at 2045 of Gemini, and will station there. So it will be approaching his 2255 degree sun. Depends, right? How close. It's not a degree. We usually get a degree before, but that's not written in stone. But it'll definitely be close enough to the North Node, right? And in his chart, Jupiter rules the 5th house. The 5th house is naturally ruled by the sun, and both Jupiter's Sagittarius and the sun's Leo have connotations with royalty. So that doesn't negate the problems that Saturn will run into while retrograde, because people may be rethinking his status as an authority figure, a foundational authority figure, as Saturn retrogrades back through his seventh house. And as I said last week too, will quincunx that Jupiter, Chiron, Juno stellium in Libra there. So, and some of that may play out financially too. I don't know. Perhaps he will, because I think they're saying that, I don't know. I shouldn't say because I don't really know, but, look for a slowdown in his fundraising. Now, I could be completely and totally wrong on that, all right? But I would look at it anyway, or just keep track of it. So, thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on July 12th for another episode of Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking podcast. I do hope probably by then maybe to look a little more closely at their charts or anyone else's chart like Kamala Harris, because they're so important or profound right now. And gosh, how much can we learn just from looking at the transits to their charts and then ultimately seeing how they play out, right? This is the way we learn astrology. It's astrology in action right now. But the end result will tell us what some of these transits actually literally did mean for each person. So till then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.